damn kids with their YouTubes and their avocado toast.
Okay, Boomer.
You kids don't know how good you have it.
Okay, Boomer. Hey, Dad, what's the Wi-Fi password? I need to know the Wi-Fi password.
Okay, Zoomer.
You find yourself in a rustic carriage, flanked by several different soldiers. You find yourself inside the carriage with your hands bound, and you also see a bunch of men in the carriage with you. You find that one of the men is a horse thief, and the others are rebels. You're taken to a city, where in that city, the rebels are taken out, each one by one, line by line. You see soldiers leering at you, angrily, saying that you need to step forward for the execution block. One of the men tries to run away, but he gets shot with arrows. And another man accepts his fate, saying, "My ancestors are proud of me, executioner. Can yours say the same?" He has his head cut off, and the whole crowd has mixed responses. Some say, "Death to the Stormcloaks." Others say, "You imperial bastards." But all the while, you're sitting at your situation, wondering what your next moves are going to be, only for you to be called to the execution block. But before you can have your head chopped off, a large dragon comes in from the skies. He makes a whirlpool, a storm that shouts, creating a massive storm and starts destroying the city. And it seems that you have a chance to escape, but not only just escape, but make decisions that will not only affect yourself, as well as the decisions of the entire continent of Tamriel, your home. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ghantt Chart, and today I'm going to be discussing to Daddysquatch the world of Skyrim. So, that little description, Daddysquatch, that's basically the intro scene of Skyrim. Like, that's what you would expect from it. And, yeah, this is kind of like everyone's first introduction to it, and it kind of, opens a lot of questions, like, what's going on? What is the world? I feel like for a lot of people, Skyrim is kind of like their first introduction to Elder Scrolls. I mean, it was mine, but there are other games in the series, and you get to have a very detailed fantasy world. And I can already tell that Daddysquatch is just curling his finger. He's ready to point and scream, "Nerd!"
I don't know.
So, the world of Skyrim, I'll tell you guys something. It is a very interesting game. I did sunk a lot of time into the game. In fact, I think this is going to be a big episode because I did a lot of research, aka I just played the game a bunch over Christmas break. Yeah.
Basically, the premise of the game is it's medieval Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Although there's some other lore attached to it as well. It's basically just your medieval Dungeons and Dragons, but it's a FPS, so you get to be the one to swing the swords and do all that sort of thing.
I mean, does this got wizards and elves and orcs, or is it just basically?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Oh well.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So Lord of the Rings, you're in Lord of the Rings then.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the world of Skyrim is very Nordic inspired. I haven't watched Lord of the Rings, probably should, but I've heard people say, or I've heard you say that it's very Nordic inspired.
Nordic and English. I mean, Tolkien was an Englishman, and he created his world, but he did it based on medieval England and medieval Vikings and all that stuff. So
yeah. So the world of Skyrim, the world of Skyrim it takes place in what they call the Fourth Era, which is basically they have different eras throughout the history of Skyrim. Basically, you had the Third Era when all of Tamriel, which was a massive continent, was under the control. It was all unified into one nation, referred to as the Empire. Now, there was an event in Oblivion that is directly responsible for all the things that went wrong in the world of Skyrim. Well, most of them at least. What happened is that Cult tried to summon a Dark Lord to come into their world to take over and kind of meld his plane of existence with the world of Tamriel and the entire world, and it failed, but again, this Dark Lord had a lot of minions, a lot of demons, and, well, the Empire that rules over Tamriel really took a beating during this time. I guess you could kind of think of the Empire as kind of like the Roman Empire, because the main capital area, Cyrodiil, it's very heavily based on, I would think, on Italy, where it's like a verdant area, with a Mediterranean climate. And a lot of the soldiers, you see them, they all have like Roman-inspired, items. They all have like legions and stuff like that. It's very all Roman-inspired.
Okay.
And they have like the different provinces, which each one has like its own like unique culture, like its own, because like Tamriel kind of conquered all these areas and unified them together, but each one has like its own unique culture. Skyrim, for example, takes a lot of influence from like Nordic cultures. You have High Rock, which is directly west of Skyrim, which is basically just a bunch of tribes that are constantly fighting over each other, and apparently it takes a lot of influence from French culture with like the Gauls and all that. You have Hammerfell, which is kind of takes a lot of influence. It's a desert area and takes a lot of influence from Arabic cultures. And then you have Black Marsh, which is basically a swamp, which is home to lizard people called Argonians. You have Morrowind, which is it's basically a province of the third game. Like, in Oblivion, that fourth game, like, Skyrim is like the fifth game in the series. In Morrowind, that's the third game, and then Oblivion, it takes place in Cyrodiil in the fourth game. But Morrowind is basically like a mostly volcanic environment, and it has a very strange culture because of that. And then you also have the Aldmeri Dominion, which is made up of Valenwood, which is a foresty area, Elsewhere, which is basically desert but is home to cat people, and then the Somerset Isles, which is where the High Elves live.
Cat people?
Yes, there are cat people called Khajiit.
Cat people, huh?
There are different races in Skyrim, and there are a lot of jokes in the Skyrim world. Like, for example, I've seen people take their cats and put like a little market sign on them, like, you know what I mean, like not paint on them, but like a little, piece of paper that says Khajiit sells many wares, and it just says merchant.
Okay.
Dad is just like, what is this? So the Empire has kind of seen better days, and it's kind of like in a decline. What happened was, after the Oblivion Crisis, Valenwood, the Somerset Isles, and Elsewhere all decided to, well, it was kind of more or less, they unified together into what they called the Aldmeri Dominion. And as far as the Empire, you had other provinces that decided to declare independence because after the way the Empire handled the Oblivion Crisis, which was to take all soldiers from the provinces and just fortify their capital province, a lot of people felt betrayed. So as a result, Black Marsh decided to, break off and declare independence, as well as Morrowind. Although Morrowind, people often joke that. So the thing about Morrowind is that I've said, before, volcanic province, right?
Right.
So what happened was that there's a giant volcano, and it erupted at some point in the Fourth Era, and as a result of that, it basically gave all of Morrowind what they called the Pompeii treatment. So it's still there, but yeah.
Oh, it's like Pompeii and stuff, huh?
Yeah, like, there's still people living there, but it definitely left a scar.
You have an ashy place?
Oh yeah, it's definitely filled with ash. Oh,
And
God,
lava.
the bad pun flew over my head. And the thing is, like, and then you have the Empire, which, all that's left of it is Cyrodiil, High Rock, and, well, technically at one point it was Hammerfell, but, well, we'll get into that, and also, right now, Skyrim, although Skyrim is trying to rebel, as I mentioned before, against the Aldmere, or trying to rebel against the Empire. So, we're in the 200th year of the Fourth Era. 200 years after the whole Oblivion Crisis, where demons flooded the Earth and tried to destroy everybody, or Mundus, as they call it. The end result of this is that we basically had, like, there was a great war that happened 25 years before the events of Skyrim, and it caused a lot of effects. Like, what happened was is that the elves decided that they were going to wage war on the Empire, and this war, the Empire was still in its recovery stage from all the destruction, because the Empire, suffered a massive attack, and also in the fourth game, the main rulers of the Empire, they all just died. Like, so there was sort of a power vacuum, and they had to figure that out. And the Empire is still recovering from that. And when the Aldmeri Dominion decided to invade the Empire, it caught the Empire completely off guard. They were eventually able to fight them to a stalemate, and were able to negotiate some terms. However, the terms were not... Some of the residents of Skyrim, like, some of these terms really pissed off the people of, the Empire. Like, for example, one of the terms was like, we will cede some of the land of Hammerfell, one of the provinces, to the Aldmeri Dominion. Hammerfell said, no, we're not going to do that, and decided to declare independence and continue fighting, the Aldmeri Dominion, who, at this point, they've been in a 4-year war against the Empire. They're still pretty beaten from it, and eventually they fight them to a standstill. Another rule was that there is a secret organization called the Blades, which essentially is their, I guess you could say, kind of their secret police. It's an agency force for the Empire, and their rule is that the Blades, are outlawed, and that everyone who is a Blade is to be hunted down and exterminated. That's their whole thing. So a lot of the Blades agents are going into hiding. And another rule is that they outlawed the worship of Talos, which is pretty much why the rebellion started in the first place. Now you're probably wondering, and I've seen a lot of people, and this kind of, sums up to one of the questions, one of the big nerd debates that's going on in Skyrim, which is what is, which side is more morally right? Is it the Empire, or is it the Stormcloaks? Now, I've heard people say for the Empire, supporting the Empire because the Empire promotes stability in Skyrim. You get a lot of trade opportunities. Plus, when the Empire banned the worship of Talos, which is one of the gods, they did it very reluctantly. Like, they were kind of put in a position where they couldn't really do anything else. But on the Stormcloak side of it, you hear a lot of stories of betrayal. Like, for example, you have Ulfric Stormcloak, during the whole, Great War, how, the Empire basically asked him, we'll give you free exchange of worship of Talos if you help, take care of one of these provinces, because he was a pretty good, effective warrior. And he did that, but then the Empire went on its word and decided to arrest him. And yeah, as a result of that, this has kind of set up a war where it's the people trying to fight for the worship of Talos, as well as trying to establish an independent Skyrim. And I hear a lot of people say, a lot of people I see on the internet are what I can only describe as pro-Empire, because their whole thing is that the Aldmeri Dominion, they're still building up their forces. Like, it's very much implied that there's going to be a round two, between the Aldmeri Dominion and the Empire. And if Skyrim was to break off from the Empire, then the only provinces that would be left would be High Rock and Cyrodiil. And geographically, I wish I could show a picture of it, but geographically, if Skyrim was to break off, then High Rock would essentially, there would be a huge chunk of land that, how do I describe it? You know, like how Russia has that one section of Kaliningrad that's right on the end of the sea, but then they have like all those Baltic nations that cut through it, and then it's regular Russia?
Right.
That's basically what they're dealing with. That would be what would they be dealing with. However, I would also look at the other side of the perspective, which I don't think a lot of people, well, I've seen some people address this on the internet as far as like towards the Stormcloaks. Because I think it's a lot more nuanced than people give it credit for. Like, let me ask you, Daddysquatch. If I was to, like, let's say we were at war with Russia because we're both Americans, and America wins, or, well, manages to get to a stalemate, but one of the rules, that we got for the stalemate in the deal, in the negotiation, is we have to banish, we have to make a law that says you're not allowed to, be a Christian. You can't worship God, you can't, do all the worship that you wanted to, and this government, the Russians, they get to send soldiers into into America and basically arrest anybody who's caught worshiping Jesus. Like, would you bend the knee, or would you tell the government to go F itself and keep fighting?
Well, just like anything else versus this Christianity, whatever, religion, that's always been a tough one for people to understand, is that it's probably caused more wars than anything else. But people want the freedom to worship how they want to worship, so they will fight for it. And depending on the people, they will fight very, very tough. So, no, I don't think I'd want the Russians coming in.
Yeah, because like I remember one person, I forget, I think it was like a quote from like a movie, Kingdom of Heaven or something. But somebody said like, like a lot of people are like, well, you could just worship your God, you just gotta be quiet about it. And the thing that I've heard about from other people is, imagine dying and telling your God that you basically, like, telling Jesus Christ, like, like, son, why did you, treat worship of me as a shameful thing? And it's like, well, God, there was I was being oppressed at the time. Like, I didn't, it was either that or, be suffered. And to a lot of people, if you were to do that, if you were a Christian and if you were to do it in private and just kind of bend the knee to the government, they would view that as a betrayal of God. Like, wouldn't you agree? Or
I'd agree.
Yeah, and a lot of people, like, oh, well, I'm still worshiping him. I'm just doing it in private. And it's like, there will be no comfort kind of thing. You're supposed to, you're not supposed to just worship God, just because it's convenient. You're supposed to worship God always. That kind of thing. And this is ultimately why the war between, why the rebellion is there in the first place. They want to establish a or an independent nation. And a lot of people often see, like, if Alfred Stormcloak, who is the leader of the rebellion, if he wins, then ultimately it would damage the Empire. But here's a question I've never seen people try to bring up, which is, what if the Empire allowed Skyrim to become independent after a while, in exchange for if a war was to break out between, the Empire and the Aldmeri Dominion, that they would have like a defensive pact, like, you'll back us up when things go hairy, kind of thing. Like, what if the Stormcloaks were to do that? Then I think the Empire would be a more amendable. Like, I don't think the Empire would allow, Skyrim to be its own, providence because of all the, the geopolitical situation I've explained. But I imagine if it fights long enough and if it's enough of a drain, inevitably the Empire is going to, just have, let it happen, kind of thing. If there's literally no other option, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it's always a tough one.
Because, like, a lot of people are like, because I imagine, like, the Empire just can't let Skyrim be its own independent nation, they can't let it happen. Inevitably, it's going to have some sort of war. It's kind of like when people said, like, I remember watching a video from Atun Shea about the Civil War, where they're discussing, like, why couldn't, the American government just let the states secede, instead of fighting them? And the guy basically responded with, there was no way that the Northern government was ever going to let that happen. That would completely delegitimize the idea of the United States of America. And I imagine that's the same with the Empire. They're not going to just let them go willy-nilly. But if the war is enough of a drain, maybe the Empire decides, you know what, we don't want to do this, but it's the only option we have.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think about that. I mean, the United States, the Civil War was a bitter war and stuff, but I think a lot of things happen that within the Civil War or in any war that they're doing on that is that I'm sure the Confederates after the war did not like the outcome of it. This was the other ones because unfortunately, to the victors goes the spoils.
Yeah.
But if you keep fighting, take a look at the people of Ireland. 1600s or 1500s, they had English overrule in there, and they had the potato famine was a way the English used to propagate and kill a lot of the Irish. They wouldn't let them get in there, wouldn't bring any food, and basically starved them out and stuff. But
and they also had like a rule where it's like, oh, we'll give you soup, but you have to renounce Catholicism in exchange and become a Protestant, which a lot of Irish people were angry about.
Yeah. And the whole thing is that, they kept fighting, and then all of a sudden, now they're independent. And sometimes, there's still a part of the northern part of it that isn't, but I have a feeling in years to come it'll be joined in when, maybe the wounds get healed. But, sometimes people fight for a long time, and it's generational. It's not just a quick, hey, they keep fighting and fighting, and they'll do it in the ways they can. I mean, you take a look at the early Christians, in Rome. The Romans were the most, they were trying to eradicate them and killing them, throwing them in Colosseums. It was sport to feed them to the lions and behead them and crucify them and all that stuff, And then all of a sudden, you get one Roman emperor. He goes, hey, these Christians are pretty good. We're going to make it our official religion. And boom, Roman now is, Catholic. And it was the original Christian church.
That makes sense.
It's strange how just things turn. I mean, it's interesting if you read some of the history. It's like, okay, well, December 25th was, celebrate the birth of Jesus. Well, actually, I think, according to history, Jesus was technically born sometime in August.
That makes sense.
But the Roman people had a holiday around the 21st or whatever, as far as, they celebrated something. So and I may have this all completely wrong, but I think the emperor understood that, and he said, well, to get the people in Rome to kind of switch over, they tried to blend Roman and Christian things together. This guy Justinian, I think it was Justinian, yeah. He was, maybe it was Augustus. No, it wasn't Augustus. I don't have to take a look at the name, but by him doing that, I mean, that legitimized the Christian religion, but it also made another empire eventually, the Byzantine, which is Eastern Orthodox, but still Christian and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's, but the same things that you're seeing in Skyrim are things that have occurred in history. So they're just basically, maybe they're adding in, like you had at the beginning, the dragon came in. Well, we don't have dragons, but, you can add that in there for a little bit of, whereas instead of a dragon, you could have had just like in, we're talking about, Pompeii or Herculaneum, where, hey, these were two very prosperous cities in Italy or during the Rome, and in a couple days they were buried.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to talk about like other, like I think for, with the Elder Scrolls, they take a lot of influence, like with what you said earlier, when you're describing how the Roman government kind of, fused, their traditions with Christian traditions. It kind of reminded me of like, because the thing about, and this is kind of going back to the religion, is that there was like an ancient religion in Skyrim, but they immediately switched over to what they call the Nine Divines, which are, it's basically a religion that the Empire, like the Elysium Empire created, and it just became, the standard where they took like elven gods and tried to infuse them into, the Nordic gods as well as the gods of the different people. Because here's the thing about the Empire is that there was a time when elves kind of ruled over the world, and as a result, they also ruled over humanity, and they enslaved them. And they treated them pretty poorly. But eventually, humanity rised up, and basically, best way I could describe it is genocide against the elves. Eventually things calmed down, but there's still a lot of that elven, society, or some of those elven influences in the religion, like how I think it's like Akatosh is technically a combination of like Lorcan and Uriel, so it's like two gods put into one. So it's kind of like a modification of the religion to make it more palatable for everybody, because the different peoples, like, and this is true of any nation, is that the different peoples have differing beliefs, about how different things, like, for example, the humans, they worship Lorcan, they used to worship Lorcan because he was the guy who helped create the world, but the elves, they despise Lorcan because what he did was he basically created the world by effectively, according to the elves, tricking them into giving up their divinity. Like, they believed that they were a race of gods, and that they had to trick their divinity and essentially create a prison for themselves, and now they're trapped in this world. Like, the High Elf Society is all about trying to maintain that divinity, by all costs, and that also includes, through creating, extreme caste systems, having their lineages traced out, through all that, and they have, like, that's sort of that difference between them, where the elves kind of view the world as a curse, while the humans kind of view the world as a gift. And that living is, a gift of every day. And the idea of, like, the Nine Divines was to try to, like, make it more palatable. Well, originally it was 8, but, as I mentioned before with Talos. Now, the thing about Talos is he's the ninth divine, he's the ninth god, and there is some controversy, but the reason why the elves despise him is because I wouldn't say he was the Jesus Christ of this world, but more the Julius Caesar, because he was an effective conqueror. He managed to conquer all of Tamriel and put it under one banner, but he did so through ruthless conquest. And he essentially used a giant robot. Yes, there are robots in this world, to basically do it and force the elves into submission.
Wait. You said medieval and all this. How do you get technology as robots?
Okay, so there was another race called the Dwemer. And the thing about the Dwemer is that they're very advanced people. They're a very logical people. They have, like, these huge ruins. They have, like, steam-powered machinery. They have, like, robots. Like, it's all kind of, like... And they also have, like, this strange metal called Dwarven metal, which is really strong. However, we don't know what happened to them. We believe that they tried to achieve Kim, but they failed, and as a result, they kind of snapped themselves out of existence.
Oh, so instead of achieving Kim, they achieved Bob.
So,
which wasn't a good thing. Oh no!
So,
we achieved Bob. We're done.
Yeah. So, to describe what achieving Kim means, it means... So the whole world of Skyrim is that it's kind of it's a dream in this one god's head. Like, the entire world is a dream in one god's head, and that you basically are waking up and realizing that you are part of the dream. And there's a lot of logical inconsistencies in recognizing the fact that you exist also simultaneously don't exist. If you're able to rectify that situation, which is what Talos inevitably did, then you essentially achieve godlike status. You can do pretty much whatever you want. You are effectively a god at that point.
Okay, now you're losing me, but that's fine. I thought it was like
Yeah,
an alternate world. Now it's an alternate world dream of some dude in the basement smoking weed. Hey, dude, what do we answer people do with this? What do you think? Yeah.
oh god.
Well, I mean, it's interesting when you sit there and you go like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones. That's kind of what it sounds like, is that it's like a Game of the Thrones, because in Game of Thrones there was this race. Oh, can't remember. They're the ones that took over pretty much Westeros, but they came from just, I want to say, Valerian. I haven't watched the series in a while, but Valeria was this advanced civilization and stuff, and they had dragons they flew around with. They were much more advanced than anybody around, but they kept to their area. But a natural disaster occurred, and one family escaped before it completely imploded on itself. But they came to Westeros, which is the land where Game of Thrones pretty much takes place with, and they've got different areas and different things that they believe in. Some people, there's a Mediterranean, there's people in the north, they've got their religion. These people got their religion, but the Valyrians had dragons, so they basically they conquered Westeros. So they took all these 7 lands or 11 lands, I don't know, these areas, consolidated them, and then the Valyrian guy says, "I'm king of everything." And then that line of rulers lasted up until one point where it was the Mad King. So the guy was insane. He just started to destroy leading members of anybody that fought with him, and then they had this big war, and they were marching on the gates, and then he was killed by one of his guard, and they have a whole new thing, and that's where the beginning of Game of Thrones starts. But it's interesting when you're saying Skyrim. It's really, this is where I would challenge you to watch the series Game of Thrones. Now, granted, Game of Thrones it's got all this, it's got more of the intrigue and all that between the characters. But when you take a look at the history and the thing of what they were doing there, it sounds just something right out of Skyrim.
Yeah. Like, I can see, like, there's a lot of elements. Like, it almost kind of sounds like that they're... Because the thing about the Elder Scrolls is that it has things added to it where it's like, it's a fantasy world, but then it also adds other things that seem not so fantasy.
Yeah, you're not going to get orcs and elves. I mean, to me, you got to go to Lord of the Rings. And
yeah.
that is where,
they have orcs in Skyrim.
Well, the other thing, too, is you should probably watch, first before you do Lord of the Rings, you have to watch The Hobbit. Because The Hobbit is the prelude to Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
Because a lot of things with The Hobbit and stuff. And I'm going to tell you, you can sit there and watch all the movies, or you can just read the books. The books are a lot better, describe a lot more than the movies do. The movies have got a quick thing. Same with the, Game of Thrones. There's excellent book series. I've read the books, I've seen the movies. Yeah, the special effects are great, but the book explains things that things are left out. Because when you read the book, you understand what's going on. When you watch the series, you're kind of like, okay, what's going on here? How did that happen?
Yeah.
So, but it's all just like you said. It's in kind of a medieval world, and sword play and all the stuff. It sounds like you're describing in there. I mean, there's no guns.
Yeah, like, I've always wondered, like, why is it... Okay, this is kind of a side tangent, but why does no medieval, like, fantasy game ever think, oh, maybe we could have, like, guns? Because in the world of Skyrim, like, you have crossbows, and in fact, there was one DLC where you had crossbows that you could fire, and they have, like, fire salts attached to it, which allows them to explode. Like, in my opinion, that's kind of the closest thing you got to a gun, but why are there no guns? You would think that in a world where people are working with potions and stuff like that, that inevitably somebody would accidentally stumble on gunpowder.
Well, okay, let me ask you this. What does it take to make gunpowder? 3 elements for black powder.
It takes sulfur,
Yeah.
sand, and
What?
sand.
No.
Or no.
3 elements of there's the old chemistry class, so I don't know how much chemistry you had. But basically it's potassium nitrate, which is the main thing. You need sulfur. You need charcoal or carbon.
Ah.
You mix it together, and I don't know whatever the ratio is of it, but you have to be careful when you're grinding it and you're mixing it, because the finer it gets, the quicker it blows up. But you got to be careful when you're mixing it together. Don't get static electricity.
Ah, that makes sense.
It blows up in your face. But see,
Yeah.
it's not only the the gunpowder, but then you got to be able to create a gun. And you got to have something that is going to withstand the explosion. And you got to have, you use a smooth board, you use a rifled, and then how do you rifle a barrel? You don't have machine tools. So, all sorts of things. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, they have this is a world where they have steel making, which steel making itself is a very, you're telling me that this is a world where people are able to, I don't want to say mass produce steel, but still make it for things like armor and swords and stuff. But you're telling me that nobody could have, seen how to make a gun?
Well, what I'm saying is that in order to make a gun, think about it. You're an engineer.
Yes.
Okay, so you pour steel out for a barrel of a gun, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have the internal barrel. You just have the round shape of the external, right?
Yes.
Okay, how do you put a nice straight bore through it?
You need a lathe.
You need a lathe. Do you think they have? It's easy to cast metal. It's easy to forge metal. But then when you got to sit there and you got to put a hole through it, that takes a little more trick. Now you can do it. There are blacksmithing techniques you can do it, but it's very labor intensive.
But lathes are the first piece of machinery that man has ever made. Like lathes are, I think it's the first machining tool that man has ever made. And I think that dates back to ancient times.
Well, I don't know, ancient, but what's the most key thing that when you're lathing out steel? What's the most critical? Anytime you machine something, you're gonna have to have a cutting tool, right?
Yes.
That cutting tool has to be harder than the material you're cutting.
Ah, that makes sense. Okay.
So it's when you're trying to cut or drill into steel, you got to have a drill bit or a long drill bit that basically is a lot harder and a lot tougher, because you can have a hard tool, but it can be brittle too. So you want a hard, tough tool steel to cut the regular steel.
Okay.
Okay, now we're digressing to engineering, but
Yeah,
that's why you
okay,
take a look at, you take a look at early cannons or all that stuff. They basically just took pieces, but they reinforced them with rings.
Ah, that
So
makes
if you
sense.
take a look at it's interesting. I was watching a show on when they took over Constantinople, which is Istanbul now, but that was the big capital in the Mediterranean, and how they were able to create these cannons to basically pound down the walls so they could evade. And it was, I forget what guy, it was I don't know if he was Polish or Romanian, but he basically, he was an engineer for hire. He went up to the guy and says, "Yeah, I can build you cannons. They'll blast through that wall. It's going to cost you."
Yeah. Yeah, I can believe that. Yeah, so there's some pretty cool stuff in the games. You can make potions, as I mentioned before, you can increase your smithing, which allows you to build some pretty cool, weapons and all that. You could even take the dragon, parts, and actually use them to make armor, which is probably the strongest part of it, or the strongest armor you can get in the game. You can practice magic, you can do all these different things, and you can also join these different guilds, which there are a lot of different guilds in the, because inevitably you're going to want to make some money. Like, there's the main quest where you have to defeat Alduin, who's trying to end the world or trying to consume the world, except not really, because he's strayed away from that path and he wants to just rule over the world because dragons have an inherent, desire to dominate over man. But, and this is sort of my playstyle, is, my brain, like, I guess you could say that I'm part cat, because I'm insanely lucky, but I also get distracted by things very easily. Hey, I better go save the world against this dragon. That quest could wait. This lady right over here, she needs me to go get some teeth from ice raids. Let's go do that. So, as a result of that, a lot of Skyrim, it very much is, this is often something I've seen people do, is that they don't do really the main quest. They focus on doing the side quests, try to help people out kind of thing. And I am ashamed to admit that I have been kind of getting, sucked into a lot of the side quests. Sometimes I get into some guilds, and I get to indulge in some different quests. My favorite guild right now that I engage in, like, initially I was opposed to them, but now I have a lot more fun, because again, it's kind of like that scene from Animal House where the professor was talking about how is it more fun to be virtuous or to sin. And I guess in this way, it is kind of more fun to sin in this game, because I joined the Thieves Guild. And they pay money for, you doing things like pickpocketing people and stealing and stuff like that. But there is a lot of fun to that, and there's a lot of perks to being in this group. So I guess at first it's like, maybe I'll reluctantly join the group if I must. But then I'm like, okay, this group's actually a lot more fun than, just being goody two-shoes all the time. Which is funny, because in the Skyrim lore, you are a character called the Dragonborn, where you have the soul of dragon inside, a human body, or an elven body, or, different things like that. And, you meet these guys that are like the Greybeards, and they teach you the way of the voice, which is basically, you can use a shout to basically shout people down. That's where the classic, Fusro Da comes in, which is a shout that allows you to just, like, knock people down on their feet. And, there are other shouts that you can learn in the game as well to get more power, but they basically say, like, whatever fate you want, is up to you. You can either be a good Dragonborn that people will sing songs about, be a hero, or you could be an evil Dragonborn, where you could do things like join the Dark Brotherhood, which is what I do a lot, where you basically assassinate the Emperor of the entire empire, which will probably cause some political instability. Definitely, most likely. But hey, like, I really get into the roleplay of my character. My character is kind of like a Napoleon-style character, where he may not necessarily join the rebellion because he's thinking about the ideals of the rebellion, but more because why be the ruler of a province when you could be the ruler of a sovereign nation?
There you go.
Exactly. Because again, I'm going that Napoleon route. And with a lot of these different quests, there are a lot of different play styles. Like, you can figure out, like, how to become, like, a mage and develop all these skills. You can become, like, an awesome warrior. A lot of people go for stealth archers, which I know a lot of people like to make fun of people that do the stealth archer, but it's a really useful tactic to, hide away from your enemies and then take pot shots at them. It's a really useful, especially early game, it's a really useful way of, doing these things. And I end up doing that a lot. Because, at the beginning of the game, you're pretty squishy. Like, I think this is a lot in the Elder Scrolls game, is that you kind of have to build yourself up to be the hero of legend. In the beginning, you're kind of squishy. I mean, your first character literally is dressed in rags and has their arms tied behind their back. They very much, are kind of helpless, but over time they have to learn to become a strong warrior, to be the hero of legend. And you get to do a lot of different things. You get to make choices that have far-reaching implications, because as I mentioned before, you could join the rebellion, and help, Skyrim become an independent nation, or you could join the Empire and help put the rebellion down, which is a huge impact. There are a lot of things that you could do. There are different guilds you can join, and there's a lot of fun quests and also not so fun quests. Like, for example, there are quests where you can do jobs for what they call the Daedric Lords. Now, this is something that is important to mention, is that there are 2 different types of gods in this world. Well, technically 3, but the 3 gods are like the Aedra, which in Elven tongue means our ancestors. These are the gods that had to give up their divinity to help make the world. And then you have the I think it's the Magna Dei or something. It's like gods that gave up portions of their magic, but immediately decided to bail because they didn't want to continue. They, at the last minute, decided, wait, what are you doing? They decided to flee. And then you have the Daedra, who right from the beginning said, I'm not going to give up any of my power to help, create this world. And here's the thing about the Daedra. A lot of people often see the Daedra as evil because a lot of them occupy different, aspects of, like, debaucherous kind of nature. And my thing about the Daedra is that all of them, like, at first they seem kind of like, debaucherous or kind of thing, but they have, like, elements to them that make them more interesting as gods. Except for Malek Ball. There's nothing deep about him. He's just straight up evil. Like, each of them has, like, a different element to them. Like, one god that I find interesting, a lot of people, talk about, is Sanguine. Sanguine is a Daedric Lord, but he's the Daedric Lord of drinking and debauchery and partying. Like, that's his whole thing. He's just like, I just want to party, I just want to drink, I just want to have a good time. And he has, like, when you do, quests for the Daedric Lords, you can get, like, Daedric artifacts or, like, blessings from them. And what Sanguine gives you for completing his quest is an item that I really like, because Daddysquatch, what item would you describe, like, if you were to create a physical representation of sin, what would you pick? Like, what object would you use as, like, a representation of all sin?
Chocolate.
Chocolate?
Chocolate.
Okay. What he gives you is a rose. And I think a rose is actually a really good example of sin, because a rose looks beautiful and they have that nice smelling smell to them, but they have thorns attached to them that prick you. And the other thing too is that, Sanguine's rose, which is an item that, a staff that you can use on people, the thing about it is that it withers and dies. And I think it's kind of symbolic of how, in the beginning, when you're going on late drunken benders, at first it's really fun, but after a while, it starts withering and wearing on your body until eventually you wither and die, just like a rose. And I like that symbolism involved in that, where it's just like, and each of the different lords, they have, like, different elements attached to them, because, some lords, like, for example, the Dark Elves who live in Morrowind, the place filled with ash, they worship 3 Daedric lords. There's Mofala, who is, like, the weaver of, like, fates and sin and all that. You have Azura, who is a vain goddess, but she also kind of, like, manipulates the ties of fate to help get, like, the best outcome for her people. And then you have Boethia, who, the best way I could describe Boethia is, how, like, people say, like, our father, when referring to God, like, different parents?
Mm-hmm.
Boethia is the kind of parent who teaches you how to swim by taking you and throwing you into the pool. She is very brutal, but her whole thing is, I am brutal because you need to learn to be strong. The whole thing about the Dark Elves is that you have to undergo suffering because suffering adds strength. You can either be like the High Elves and just be like, I miss my divinity, I want my divinity back, and try to preserve the past, or you can try to push forward, build some muscle, be strong, and achieve a greater level of divinity that you didn't have before.
Well, it's
And
kind
that's
of
like
like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Exactly. And if you visit, like, if you listen to, like, a lot of the stories about Morrowind, it's a very brutal place. But the people, they almost accept it. Like, there's a meme I'll have to send you at some point that kind of sums up the Dark Elf way of thinking of things. But yeah, it very much is a reflection of that. With the different gods, they're different. There's a lot of different gods, like, that have, like, their different spheres of influences, and some are better than others. Like, probably one god that I think is kind of interesting is Hircine. Another one. There's a bunch of different gods, and I could probably go on describing each one individually, but Hircine, he's the god of the hunt. And his whole thing is that his worshippers, they're werebeasts. They're werewolves, they're werehogs, they're werebears. They're those kind of people. But his whole thing is that he is basically like the spirit of the hunt. He just wants his whole people, because there is an afterlife for all the different, people when they die. And the idea is that when you die and you worship Hircine, you get to be a part of the eternal hunt, which is you get to go and hunt prey forever kind of thing. And Hircine's whole thing is just, he's fair. Like, his whole thing is just like, I just want to, be a part of the hunt. Like, if a prey manages to escape, it's like, yeah, you get to escape this one time because, the prey has to have a chance to be able to get through, to get away. Otherwise, it's not fun. That's part of the fun of the hunt.
Okay.
There's a lot of different quests in the Skyrim world. There's also some quests that people kind of rag on, like the quest with Meridia, who is another Daedric lord, who a lot of people hate because she has like a beacon inside of a chest, and if you take it, it becomes part of your inventory, and you can't get rid of it. And she shouts, "You will do my bidding! You will take the beacon! You will take it to the temple!" I don't hate this quest as much as some people do, because, yeah, it's a little annoying, but you do get a lot of money out of it. And you get a pretty sick sword out of it, from it. So, yeah. I think the one quest that I hate in this game is the Stones of Baron Zaya. Where it's like, oh, we got all these gems, from this crown, from this, queen that, was part of the Queen of Morrowind, and they were taken apart, and you have to go looking for them. There are 24 gems. And they don't have any quest markers, unless you mod the game to have quest markers. You have to go searching all of Skyrim. They're scattered all over the place to find them. And it really does feel like you're in purgatory, just trying to find them all. That's why I usually kind of treat it as a side hustle. Even that's quest, because I'll be willing to do a bunch of fast quests for people. If you want me to help deliver your friend's ashes to a cemetery in Falkreath or whatever, I'll do it. In the city, I'll do it. You need me to gather some ingredients, I'll do it. But that's the one quest where I'm just like, no. I still do it because there's a nice little, but I kind of treat it as like a side gig kind of thing.
Sure.
Yeah. This one quest, it's maybe a small quest, but I like it because I think it's symbolic of the entire game. So you go to this one lady who, in the main city that you first encounter, there's a tree, but it's dead looking. And you have this priest who's like, I need you to, this tree is asleep, but maybe we can wake it up if we gather this sap. Which we need to get this tool from this one area, then we could go travel towards this other area and then harvest the main tree, the mother tree, to help wake up this baby tree. Now, there are two options in this quest. For example, you can either harvest the sap, which if you take one of the pilgrims with you, like there's a pilgrim who hears about this, is like, I would like to accommodate with you. He is angry that you tried to attack the tree, or because you have to swing at the roots to get to the top of the tree. And he basically says, like, why would you do this? And he's like, well, I need to get the saps. It's like, you're going to attack this tree, this gift from the goddess of nature, Kinnereth. Because that's her role. She's the goddess of nature. Just to harvest some sap, just to, for slavish maintenance. And it's like, well, do you have a better idea? And the guy's like, let me pray to Kinnereth, to the tree, to get a sapling. And you have two options. You can either option A, harvest the sap, and then bring the old tree back to life, which if you do that, a bunch of these creatures called Spriggans will start killing a bunch of the pilgrims around, and you have to deal with them. Or option B, you can respect nature and just take the sapling. And ultimately this means that the old tree will be destroyed, but you have a new tree to replace it. Now, this quest, I think, is a metaphor for all of the entire theme of Skyrim in general. Because if you look at the game, it's very much a world of, it's a shell of its former self. The Empire, once this great empire that ruled over all of Skyrim, is now a shell of its former self. In all the different guilds that you join, they're kind of on their last legs and are kind of like, we need to rebuild ourselves. And you can rebuild them. But it also asks this question in the game. Do you help rebuild an organization when it's on its last legs, or do you allow it to die so that way something better could take its form? And it's like that choice. And I think, because when you open the game, you have like that chipped image of the Empire, that chipped emblem. The Empire has kind of seen better days. And they think in a subconscious way, the game is kind of asking you the question, do you try, because the whole main quest about it is you're trying to protect, trying to save this world, so that way Alduin doesn't, rule over it or decide to eat the world, so that way a new world could begin. And again, it asks that question, what is better, to maintain what we have right now, to keep things going and trying to rebuild those things, trying to repair it, or should we just burn it all down and try to build something new? Because a lot of the cities and the areas, they all have that theme of like degradation. Like they were once, were these big prosperous areas that have seen better days. Like, for example, the home to the Thieves Guild. It's, you're told that at one point this city was once a vibrant, community with all this hub for trade and all that. And now, it's seen better days, and it's kind of become like Detroit, where it's just criminals everywhere making money. No offense to anyone who lives in Detroit, of course.
Well, Ghantt Chart, I have a feeling you could talk about this for the next 10 hours.
I feel like I really could, and I guess one last thing that I would like to leave on this, before we head on out, is some mods. And I wonder if I'll do like a part 2 on this or something like that, maybe just like discuss it, because there's a lot of lore in these games. I feel like I've talked your head, but one thing I would like to talk about are mods.
Sure.
Which, there's some jokey mods. For example, they replace all the trains in Skyrim or all the dragons with trains from Thomas the Tank Engine. Or you sometimes get some more serious mods, which add some really cool quests. My personal favorite mod right now is the second Great War mod, which I love the Civil War quest line because, again, I love the idea of being a part of big battles and, destroying entire cities. And this mod is like that, the Civil War mod, but taking it to its next level. Right. And it really does make you feel like, in the beginning you kind of take a beating, but over time, because the Aldmeri Dominion does decide to declare a second war on the Empire, and now you can make decisions to either help Thalmor, the Aldmeri Dominion, take over, or you can either fight back and actually manage to get some, fighting involved. And your actions do make a huge difference, and there's a lot of interesting play styles. And I would seriously recommend, if anyone wants like a add-on to that, I would recommend that. I would also recommend the Bards College quest Redux, because the Bards College kind of sucks in the vanilla game, because it's literally just, you go to a college, you do a couple quests, you get some knowledge. Like, I wanted to become a bard, but I don't even get to learn how to play the lute. But this quest fixes that, and I would recommend that. I'll attach the links to those mods. And yeah, there's a lot of things in Skyrim that I think are pretty interesting. In fact, if Daddysquatch would like, we could have I could even like do like a little playthrough, kind of show him some stuff. We gather some footage and get sort of his reaction from it. Daddysquatch, do you have any responses to it, or are you just gonna call me a nerd for this episode?
No, I'm just saying is that I would highly recommend for all those who are Skyrim fans but have not looked at these 2 movies or these sets of movies, go do it, because I think it bleeds right into it. But that's, again, you're going to be your Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and Game of Thrones. So you actually get to see, some other things to it, but you'll see how they blend that. Maybe did the movie come from the game or did the game come from the movies? Something to take a look at.
Well, the game clearly came from the movies, but yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, like I feel like I could nerd out about a lot of these things, and I think this is another idea, which is I'm sure that there's other topics that you could nerd out about, and I'm sure that if the fans would like that, we'd be willing to do that. And I'm sure there's some shows and movies and stuff like that, that you could nerd out about, and I'm looking forward to seeing what topic you, Daddysquatch, bring it to the table to nerd out about, just so I can call you a nerd.
That sounds
All right.
good.
Well, that is our episode on Skyrim. If there's anything else that you would like, our episodes are on Spotify and are also on YouTube. You can find us there, and yeah, we'll see you next time. Any words of wisdom, Daddysquatch?
Well, stay warm.
You take care. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.